In the world of the Lion King, power is inherited, passed from father to son. As part of the natural order, Mufasa, the wise and noble ruler, was destined to guide Simba into kingship, ensuring the Pride Lands remained strong. But what if the story had taken a different turn? After Mufasa's tragic death and Simba's disappearance, the Pride Lands were left vulnerable, leaderless. Scar, Mufasa's ambitious and cunning brother, seized the throne, bringing devastation to the land. But there was someone else who had already ruled by Mufasa's side. Someone respected, experienced, and strong. Sarabi. As Mufasa's queen, Sarabi was more than just his mate. She was a leader in her own right. She commanded the respect of the lionesses, guided the pride, and ensured the balance of the kingdom alongside Mufasa. Even in the face of Scar's tyranny, she never bowed to his authority. When Scar demanded loyalty, she responded with defiance. When the Pride Lands fell into ruin, she openly challenged his rule. So, why wasn't Sarabi ever considered as Mufasa's successor? Tradition dictated that the throne belonged to the next male in the bloodline. But with Simba presumed dead and Scar proving to be a disastrous ruler, what if the lionesses had rejected Scar's claim and placed their trust in Sarabi instead? Could she have become the first true Lion Queen of the Pride Lands? This raises a fascinating question. What if Sarabi had taken the throne instead of Scar? Would the Pride Lands have avoided years of suffering? Would she have been able to hold the kingdom together, preventing the famine and destruction that followed Scar's rule? And if Simba had returned to find his mother leading the kingdom, would he have still fought for the throne, or would he have followed a different destiny? In this story, we will explore how the Pride Lands could have changed if Sarabi had ruled in Scar's place. We will examine the strength she already displayed, the decisions she might have made, and the ripple effects of a different ruler on the entire Lion King saga. Because perhaps Sarabi was never just meant to be a queen consort. Perhaps she was destined to be the first great Lion Queen. Sarabi is one of the Lion King's most overlooked yet quietly powerful characters. While her role is limited in screen time, her presence carries immense weight. She is the matriarch of the pride, the embodiment of resilience, and the only lioness brave enough to stand against Scar's reign. From what Disney presents, we know a few key things about Sarabi's character. First, she was Mufasa's queen and a respected leader. Sarabi wasn't just Mufasa's mate. She was his partner in ruling. She stood by his side, ensured the pride thrived, and played an active role in maintaining balance. Even Scar, who despised Mufasa, acknowledged Sarabi's authority. He relied on her to keep order among the lionesses, even after he took power. Seku, she refused to submit to Scar. After Mufasa's death, Scar expected immediate submission from Sarabi and the other lionesses. But unlike the rest, she openly defied him. In one of the film's most iconic moments, when Scar asks why the pride isn't hunting enough, Sarabi stands tall and declares, "You're sentencing us to death." Her courage in challenging a tyrant to his face despite knowing the dangers proves that Sarabi had the heart of a ruler. She survived Scar's reign and led the lionesses through hardship. While the Pride Lands fell into famine, Sarabi endured. She kept the lionesses together, ensuring the survival of the pride despite Scar's reckless rule. This shows her incredible resilience. Where others might have given up, she remained steadfast even in the darkest times. But despite all of these qualities, the film never even entertains the idea that Sarabi could have led the kingdom herself. Why? Part of it comes from the traditional power structure in the Lion King's universe. The throne typically passes from king to king, meaning Sarabi was never in direct consideration. But given Scar's incompetence and cruelty, could the lionesses have broken tradition and chosen Sarabi as their queen instead? If they had, she could have led the Pride Lands down a very different path, one where order and wisdom took precedence over Scar's reckless ambition. But could the lionesses have truly challenged Scar, or would he have crushed any resistance before Sarabi had a chance to lead? To answer that, we must explore the what-if scenarios, how Sarabi could have risen to power in an alternate timeline. In The Lion King, the natural order is shattered when Scar seizes the throne after Mufasa's death. But what if the lionesses had taken control of their own destiny? Could Sarabi have risen as queen instead of Scar? Let's explore two alternate scenarios where Sarabi could have ruled the Pride Lands. Scenario 1. The Lionesses reject Scar and crown. Sarabi as Queen Scar's claim to the throne was based on two things: being Mufasa's brother and Simba's presumed death. But Scar was never a respected figure. He was seen as weak, cunning, and detached from the Pride's well-being. In this alternate timeline, instead of allowing Scar to take power, the Lionesses unite behind Sarabi. The Lionesses take a stand. With no male heir present, the Lionesses, led by Sarabi, refuse to acknowledge Scar's rule. They physically block Scar from the throne, standing together as a force he cannot overpower. Without their cooperation, Scar is powerless. He has no ability to hunt, lead, or command loyalty. Sarabi becomes queen by default. Unlike Scar, Sarabi is respected and has the Pride's trust. The kingdom would continue under her guidance, maintaining the balance that Mufasa had built. Without Scar's reckless decisions, the Pride Lands wouldn't fall into ruin, ensuring the survival of the ecosystem. What would Scar do? Scar, furious and humiliated, might have fled the Pride Lands or attempted to rally the hyenas against Sarabi. But with the Lionesses united and organized, they could have easily overpowered him, forcing him into exile before he could destroy the kingdom. This scenario is perhaps the most peaceful and logical outcome. Had the Lionesses simply refused Scar's leadership, the kingdom could have thrived under Sarabi's wisdom. Scenario 2. Sarabi leads a rebellion against Scar. In this version, Scar successfully seizes the throne, but instead of accepting her fate, Sarabi starts a secret resistance, the underground movement. Sarabi, despite being forced to serve Scar, begins gathering loyal lionesses to resist his rule. They sabotage Scar's control by disrupting hunting efforts and secretly maintaining alliances with animals outside the kingdom, seeking Simba sooner. Instead of waiting for fate to intervene, Sarabi could have sent Nala much earlier to find help. If Simba had returned sooner, the battle against Scar might have been smaller, faster, and less destructive. The final confrontation. If Sarabi had launched an organized coup, Scar would have been outnumbered and overthrown without the need for an intense battle. With Sarabi in control, Simba could have returned to a stable kingdom instead of a ruined wasteland. This scenario would have made Sarabi one of the most strategic leaders in the franchise, proving that intelligence and patience are just as powerful as brute strength. Which scenario would have been more likely? Between these two possibilities, Scenario 1, the Lionesses rejecting Scar immediately, seems like the most efficient and peaceful option. However, Scenario 2, Sarabi leading a rebellion, aligns more with how Disney structures its stories, giving a greater sense of struggle before the resolution. Either way, both show that Sarabi had the wisdom, strength, and leadership to rule in Scar's place. But if Sarabi had ruled, how different would the Lion King have been? To answer that, we must examine how her leadership would have changed the entire course of the story. Chapter 4. How this would have changed the Lion King. 600 words. If Sarabi had taken the throne instead of Scar, the Lion King would have been a completely different story. Without Scar's destructive rule, the Pride Lands would not have fallen into ruin, and Simba's journey would have taken an entirely new direction. Let's explore the three biggest changes that would have reshaped the movie's events. 1. The Pride Lands would have thrived, not fallen into ruin. One of the most devastating consequences of Scar's rule was the collapse of the ecosystem. By allowing the hyenas to overhunt and consume all available resources, he transformed the once thriving Pride Lands into a barren wasteland. But under Sarabi's leadership, things would have been different. The circle of life would have been maintained. Sarabi understood the balance of nature. She would have ensured that the lionesses hunted responsibly, preventing the devastation caused by Scar. Without Scar's greed and mismanagement, the Pride Lands would have remained fertile and abundant. The hyenas would not have taken over. Scar allowed the hyenas to run wild, consuming everything in their path. Sarabi would have kept them in check, maintaining order rather than letting chaos take over. Without Scar's misrule, the Pride Lands would have remained a kingdom of prosperity, and the need for Simba to return in an act of restoration would have been significantly reduced. 2. Simba's return would have been very different. One of the most emotional moments in The Lion King is Simba's return to a devastated homeland. But if Sarabi had ruled instead of Scar, Simba would not have found the kingdom in ruins. He would have returned to a land still thriving. This creates a fascinating question. Would Simba have even wanted to reclaim the throne? Would Simba still see himself as the true king? If the Pride lands were still thriving under Sarabi, Simba would not have felt an urgent need to overthrow anyone. Instead of a warrior reclaiming his birthright, he might have seen his mother's leadership as sufficient and chosen to take on a different role. A mother-son power struggle? If Sarabi had ruled successfully, Simba's return could have sparked an entirely different conflict. Would Sarabi step aside for Simba or insist on continuing her reign? Would Simba feel pressured to take the throne despite the kingdom being stable? This would have added a layer of political and emotional complexity never seen in the original movie. 3. The final battle might never have happened. In The Lion King, the final confrontation between Simba and Scar is one of the most iconic moments of the film. But if Sarabi had ruled instead of Scar, this battle might never have been necessary. Without Scar, there's no fight for the throne. With Sarabi already in power, Simba wouldn't have needed to wage a war to reclaim the kingdom. This means the epic battle between the lionesses and the hyenas may have never taken place. Would Simba have left his carefree life behind? If there was no ruined kingdom to return to, Simba might have chosen to stay in exile, living a peaceful life away from responsibility. Would he have been content with that? Or would his destiny as king still have called him back? This completely changes the climax of The Lion King, removing the grand moment of redemption and triumph over Scar. Would The Lion King still be the same without Scar's rule? Without Scar's tyranny, the Pride lands wouldn't have fallen, the final battle might not have happened, and Simba's return would have been far less urgent. This raises an interesting point. While Sarabi ruling would have been better for the Pride lands, it might have made The Lion King a less dramatic story. Scar's rule created the stakes, tension, and motivation that made Simba's journey so compelling. Without that, the story would have lacked its powerful rise-fall redemption arc. So, in a way, Scar's destruction was necessary for Simba's story to exist. But what about Sarabi's legacy? If she had ruled, how would she be remembered? To explore that, we must ask, would Sarabi have been the greatest ruler the Pride lands had ever seen? If Sarabi had ruled instead of Scar, she would have made history, not just as Mufasa's queen, but as the first true Lion Queen of the Pride lands. Her rule would have been defined by wisdom, strength, and stability, marking a new era in the kingdom's history. But would she have been remembered as the greatest ruler of all? A queen who prioritized balance. Sarabi always understood the delicate balance of the circle of life. Unlike Scar, who ruled out of ego and greed, she would have ensured that harmony was maintained in the kingdom. Under her rule, the Pride lands would have thrived, and future generations would have grown up in prosperity. A symbol of resilience. Even in the Lion King's original timeline, Sarabi proved her strength by surviving Scar's rule and never submitting to his authority. As queen, she would have led not through fear, but through wisdom and courage, making her a legendary figure among the lionesses. A different future for the Pride lands. Had Sarabi ruled, the kingdom would have flourished for years, possibly leading to an entirely different structure of leadership, where lionesses played a bigger role in ruling. Instead of a male-centric monarchy, the Pride lands could have evolved into a more balanced society. If Sarabi had ruled, what would have happened when Simba returned? Would she have stepped aside? If the Pride lands were thriving under Sarabi, would Simba still have felt the need to take the throne? Would he have had to prove himself as a leader? Or would Sarabi have simply passed down her wisdom? Or should she have remained as queen? Would Sarabi have been the stronger ruler in the long run? Compared to Simba, if she had continued leading, how different would the future of the Pride lands have been? Sarabi's legacy could have been far greater, not just as the mother of a king, but as a ruler in her own right. And that leads us to the final question. Should Sarabi have ruled instead of Simba? After exploring this alternate timeline, one thing is clear. Sarabi had all the qualities of a great ruler: wisdom, resilience, and the respect of the lionesses. If she had taken the throne instead of Scar, the Pride lands would have avoided years of famine and suffering. But now comes the ultimate question. Should Sarabi have ruled instead of Simba as well? Would Sarabi have been the stronger ruler? Sarabi had more experience. As the former queen, she already knew how to rule, while Simba had spent years in exile with no leadership training. Simba had to rediscover his identity, but Sarabi never lost hers. She remained strong even after Mufasa's death. A more stable kingdom, under her rule. If Sarabi had remained queen after Scar's downfall, Simba could have learned from her before taking over, ensuring a smoother transition. Instead of immediately stepping into power, Simba could have grown into his role under her guidance. Would Simba still have taken the throne? The conflict of the returning heir. If Sarabi had ruled successfully, Simba might not have felt the same urgency to reclaim the throne. Would he have accepted his mother's leadership and waited longer before taking his place? This would have created a completely different dynamic, one where Simba and Sarabi had to navigate their shared rule. Would the Pride Lands have evolved? If Sarabi had remained in power, it could have changed the entire structure of leadership, possibly leading to a more balanced system where lionesses played a bigger role in governance. This might have been a more sustainable system than simply returning to the tradition of a male king. Should Sarabi have been the true ruler? At the end of the day, the Lion King tells Simba's story, his fall, growth, and redemption. But what if it had been Sarabi's story instead? Would the Pride Lands have been better off if Sarabi had ruled from the start, even beyond Scar's reign? Should Sarabi have been the true ruler of the Pride Lands? Would she have been a better leader than Scar? Or even Simba? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Sarabi should have ruled instead of Scar? What about Simba? Let's debate this Lion King alternate reality.